you a handout. It'll correspond to the slides that you're going to see on the presentation today, so you can follow along and make notes as we go. Okay. I want to make the announcement that our workshop is being taped today. The camera's focusing on what's up on the screen. So please know that you're being taped today, or that we are being taped today for eventually putting this, we hope, on a DVD. And when we start working on an online writing center, that's something that's in our future. So we'll have workshops up to be streamed on an online writing center. All right, good morning, everybody. Let me ask, first of all, how many of you have research papers in your future? Almost everybody. Okay, excellent. Then you are in the right place. Today we are going to talk about, first of all, what plagiarism is. I'm going to give you some definitions and some descriptions. I brought with me the book that I refer to in today's workshop. It's called the Little Brown Compact Handbook, and it's a great little book. It's got all kinds of stuff for writing, but most importantly, it's got whole sections, actually 3 of them, that would be of use to students in English classes. It's got a section on research writing and how to go about researching, preparing for a research paper, how to write in different disciplines, including literature classes, and then a whole section on MLA formatting and how to cite sources. So it's a really great little book. I brought it with me in case questions come up that I can't answer, but my definitions from plagiarism are actually not my own. They come out of that book. I'm also going to talk today about how to prevent it. So I'm not talking today about citation or about how to do a works cited page or how to do in-text citations. I will show you examples of those things, but that's not what today's workshop is about. We do have more workshops coming up in April and May that cover both MLA citation and integrating sources into your text. So if you're interested in that, look for those coming up. April calendar should be out very soon. I just sent it off to be printed, so it should be out pretty soon. Okay? But today we're here to talk about plagiarism, what it is, and how to prevent it. All right, so here's that Little Brown Handbook. Here's the definition. Plagiarism is the presentation of someone else's words, research, or ideas as your own. And I think for the most part, people understand that if I'm borrowing somebody else's words, word for word, if I don't give that person credit, I'm probably plagiarizing. However, I think the idea of ideas is a little fuzzier, a little harder to wrap our minds around. What if it's in my own words? What if I read it in 2 different books instead of just one? I think it gets a little fuzzier there, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that during the presentation today. And most schools, most teachers don't make the distinction between accidental and accidental and deliberate plagiarism. Plagiarism is plagiarism. You know, you have to be very careful with how you're presenting the words and ideas of someone else, just to make sure that there is no doubt that the words you're using are your own and that you're giving credit to the ideas that aren't your own. Okay. All right, so some definitions for you. Deliberate plagiarism, you know, really, I think deliberate plagiarism happens very rarely. At least that's been my experience as a teacher. Deliberate plagiarism happens when you copy or download something from the internet, when you summarize someone else's words from a book or an article without giving that person credit, or if you turn in work that's, in essence, not your own. You had someone else write it, you went to a cheat site and bought a paper, something like that. And like I said, I think this happens pretty rarely. In fact, in my, what is it now, some 12 years or so of teaching experience, I only had 2 instances of students who actually deliberately went out and plagiarized something. I had one student who she turned in a paper, and I looked at it, and I looked at the first sentence, and the first sentence sounded a little fishy. I went and typed the first sentence into Google, and up came the website for cheathouse.com, and there was the paper right there, in full, the entire paper. And so, you know, that was like a really obvious, rare kind of situation. I had another student who copied and pasted a bunch of stuff from like a fan type website she was writing a paper about. It was something like, you know, Jennifer Aniston versus Angelina Jolie. It was some kind of, and so she just like grabbed the information from a fan websites and plugged a bunch of stuff in, and that too, whole chunks of the paper came up with having been borrowed from someplace else. And you know, the second situation, the girl just sort of started crying when I asked her about it, and you know, was having things going on at home and didn't have the time and all of this stuff. And we'll talk a little bit about time management in a little bit. But really, those deliberate, you know, instances of plagiarism, I think they're pretty rare. I think most students really want to cite correctly. Most students are trying to cite correctly, and more likely this is what's going to happen. You're going to accidentally plagiarize if you do it at all. So you forget to place quotation marks, right? You're in a hurry, you're proofreading at the last minute, you don't notice that you forgot to place quotation marks. Or when you're transferring something from your notes that you took into your typed draft, you know, you forget that it wasn't your own words. You may forget to put a citation there. Again, you're typing so quickly, you're trying to get things done, or you've got these great ideas, you just got to get them out, and you forget that you need to put a citation there. Or this one, which is generally fairly common, omitting a citation because you're unaware that you need to. And this was what I was talking about with ideas. A lot of students just don't know that they need to cite someone else's ideas. So as of now, you all have been officially informed that ideas are something that you need to cite. So now you can't claim that you don't know. Now you officially know. But this is usually where I see problems coming up in student writing. And this I usually see this in the drafting stage. They bring it in for a class workshop, and they go, hey, you know, I wasn't sure about this. I put it in my own words. It came from this book or this article or this website. What do I need to do with it? That's usually what happens. The student just doesn't ask or doesn't know to ask. Okay. All right, how are we doing so far? Let me stop here and see if you have any questions. Pretty good so far? Okay, very good. Then let's move on. Okay. It is a big deal, okay? And colleges do make a big deal out of it because it's lying and stealing, right? You're stealing someone else's words, someone else's research, someone else's ideas, and you're lying. You're saying it belongs to you, that you came up with it. And to me, this is the more important. I mean, stealing and lying are bad enough, but to me, this is the one that's worse than that. That it betrays your responsibilities as a student. And let me just take a couple of minutes to explain that. When you're in English 50, say, or English 60B, I don't know if you do research there, but if you're in English 50, you are working on a paper. Say you plagiarize your paper and you turn it in, you get an A, and you move on to 1A. Okay? Now, you didn't learn to do the research in 50A when the stakes were fairly low, right? You move on to 1A. Okay? Now, suddenly, this is the transfer level course. Okay? You're hoping to transfer to UCR. Now, this is the course you have to take for that. Okay, now say you plagiarize there and you don't get caught. You get a grade there and you move on. Okay, great, I'm going on to UCR, excellent. Now I'm in a big time university, I'm paying a heck of a lot more, I'm in my field, I'm heading toward my career path, right? Say you plagiarize again. Okay. Now, not only did you not learn what happened in English 50, but now you're perpetuating. Now you have to keep lying and stealing and all of this to keep that going because now you're researching more. And you know, I've heard about students who plagiarize in PhD programs. I heard about that just recently at a conference I was at. A student in a PhD program plagiarized a paper, and there was a committee being gathered together to determine if that student was going to be kicked out of the program. Now imagine you make it that far. How high are the stakes by the time you get to a master's program or a PhD program or even your bachelor's degree? You're getting your bachelor's degree, getting ready to go into a program for something else. You're getting ready to start your career, and suddenly you might not be able to. So my thinking always is, you're in 50, you're here where the fees are a lot cheaper and the stakes are a lot lower. Learn it now, make mistakes now, and ask lots of questions now, as opposed to never learning how to do it, how to cite and how to not plagiarize. and going along and waiting till the stakes get really high. There were a whole bunch of stories in the paper, oh gosh, I guess a year or two ago, about famous writers who had actually plagiarized, newspaper writers and such. My gosh, think then how high the stakes are. This is your career. Those people getting caught will never work in that field again. And you know, will they ever be credible? They're famous. They were famous. Now they're infamous for having plagiarized. So better make the mistake now here when you've got tons of resources you can go to ask. You've always got your teacher. You've got here in the Writing Center. You've got lots of handouts and handbooks and websites that can help you learn how to cite correctly so you don't plagiarize. So that's always my thinking. Make the mistake now when you've got leeway, when a teacher, you can walk up to a teacher and say, gee, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? And the person will say, no problem, I'll show you. Or, you know, gee, I'm turning in my paper, but there's a couple sentences in there I want to show you. I'm not sure if they're right. And your teacher will probably say, okay, no problem. Thank you for letting me know. We'll talk about citation when I hand these papers back, right? So when the stakes are much lower, it's always better. If you do plagiarize, though, there are consequences depending on the school that you're at. You may have formal charges filed against you. An investigation may be conducted. Your instructor may be required to provide a copy of the paper and report from, say, turnitin.com or a copy of the website where you plagiarized from. Most importantly to students, or at least one important thing to students, you may lose your financial aid. You could be expelled from school. Some of the bigger universities have a zero tolerance policy for plagiarism. One time and that's it, you're out. So again, stakes could be pretty high if you move on to an exclusive school and then plagiarize there. You don't want to lose financial aid either. So the consequences are pretty serious. Schools do take this seriously, and it is important. You want to turn in the work that is your own. You want to be honest about what you're doing. All right, how are we doing? Any questions so far? Okay. All right. And so here are some reasons we probably all can guess why people plagiarize. You know, you run into a lack of time, you run into stuff that happens in your life. That's what happened with that one student that I talked about. She said she just, you know, had things going on at home and things got away from her, time got away from her. And so, you know, it happens, but plagiarism should not be your out. People may be afraid of turning in a bad paper or procrastinators, right? People who put off doing their papers at the last minute may discover that writer's block hits them at that last minute, and suddenly there's, you know, oh my gosh, what do I do? I can't think of anything. Well, I know I can get a paper for $7.95 a page at cheathouse.com, so I'll just go on there and buy one. You may not know about plagiarism. And cultures, some cultures, it's acceptable to not just borrow the works of others, but to put those works in your paper without citations. It shows in those cultures that you are well-versed in the readings that are accepted and honored in that culture. So some cultures, plagiarism's okay. Korean culture is one of those cultures where it's not only acceptable, it's expected that students will put the great works of other people in their work. It shows that they've read it and they know it and they understand it. And so that idea of it belongs to somebody else just isn't there. Okay, so how to avoid plagiarism? That's probably what you all have been waiting for. Let me talk first about what you do not need to cite. Anything, first of all, anything you come up with independently does not need to be cited. So, for instance, I used to have students write a paper where they had to conduct a survey. Okay? So they wrote out the survey questions. I told them they had to ask 50 people, so they went and, you know, stood out in some place where a bunch of people were walking by, and they asked the 2 or 3 questions that they came up with for their survey. They tallied all the results and came out with percentages. They determined, they came to conclusions based on those percentages of people who said yes or no to their survey questions, and then they wrote about them in a paper. Okay? All of that is independent, right? They came up with the questions, they conducted the survey, they did all the math to come up with the percentages, and then they wrote about the results that they came up with. All of that's independent. If you conduct an experiment, okay, you do the work, you decide what you're looking for, you choose the chemicals you're going to use to create or conduct that experiment, and then you write about those results. That's independent material. You did it yourself. Okay, so anything that you do on your own obviously does not need to be cited. Okay. A little bit easier, folk literature. If you are talking about something and you make a reference to Snow White biting the apple or Cinderella needing to be home at midnight, right? These are common knowledge kinds of things. Everybody understands when I say Snow White bit the apple and fell asleep,